Me on the show today is Franco Terrazzano, who's the federal director for the Canadian Taxpayer Federation. Franco, carbon taxes are rising, right? There's talk about a second carbon tax around fuel standards. I know you've written about this before. It looks to me like the combination of those two things is probably going to be at least 50 cents more than we're paying now by 2030. So let's talk a little bit about the carbon tax. I mean, the government talks quite a bit about how this is revenue neutral. It gives back more money to Canadians than they actually get. But, you know, I know this is a claim that the opposition parties says is not true. You guys are the tax experts. Talk to us about what's going on with carbon taxes as it relates to how much money people get back.
Well, unfortunately, the Trudeau government is playing word games with Canadians. Look, you're not going to tax everyone, then skim a little bit off the top to pay for your bureaucrats, then give money back, and somehow think you're going to be making everyone better off through rebates. If you really think that this tax is going to make you better off, well, then I got some ocean view property in Regina that I want to sell you. But hey, don't take my word for it. Look at the parliamentary budget officer, the government's independent, nonpartisan budget watchdog. They show that the government is using magic math. In fact, this year, the average household, the carbon tax will cost the average household anywhere between $300 all the way up to $670, even after the rebates. So the parliamentary budget officer is showing that the Trudeau government is using magic math.
So what you're saying is that every person will actually pay more, not the claims that the Liberals are saying that it is revenue neutral.
So what I'm saying is that the average household, these are the numbers that were crunched by the parliamentary budget officers, that the Trudeau government's carbon tax, the claim that it's somehow making families better off, is incorrect for the average family. And in fact, the average family, the carbon tax will cost this year anywhere between $300 and $670, even after the rebates. But look, that is a yearly cost. Every single year, it's going to cost the average Canadian family hundreds of dollars. And right now, we are seeing inflation reach some of the record highs in Canada. Nearly 4 decades high is something I heard. And what the Trudeau government is doing is making these tough times tougher by increasing gas prices, by increasing grocery prices indirectly, and by directly increasing our heating bills during the winter.
And can you talk a little bit about the second carbon tax on the fuel standard? Because not a lot of people are aware of it, number one. And the second thing is it doesn't come into effect until next year. So just some thoughts on that.
Well, it's going to be disastrous for so many people who are already struggling. You know, I can't believe we have to say this out loud with our mouth, but it should have been a no-brainer not to continue raising taxes, especially on the necessities of life, while Canadians are struggling right now. So here's what's happening. A second carbon tax is coming through next year through fuel regulations. And The Economist, the government's own analysis, shows that it's going to hammer the people who can least afford it. Again, this is coming straight from the government's own analysis. It shows that the people who are going to be made the worse off through the second carbon tax are the people who are lower middle income Canadians, those who are already struggling through energy poverty, those who are single mothers, the seniors who are living on fixed income. So again, we're seeing another carbon tax hike in the form of fuel regulations coming next year.
We noticed that some of the Atlantic provinces are struggling with the high cost of energy. Some of the premiers have been pretty outspoken about that, asking for a bit of a break. Talk to us a bit. I mean, every province can have their own plan, but what the federal government is saying, doesn't matter what your plan is, we still expect you to, pay these carbon tax prices. Talk to us about what's going on in Atlantic Canada, and then juxtapose that with what's going on in Quebec.
Well, just recently, Trudeau announced that he is going to be raising the carbon tax in the Atlantic Canadian provinces. He's going to force them to pay his mandatory minimum carbon tax rate, even though many of the Atlantic Canadian provinces are some of the big leaders in terms of emissions reductions. Now, in Canada, all provinces are supposed to be equal. But one province is just a little more equal in the eyes of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And that's because he is forcing every other Canadian next year to pay his higher carbon tax rate, but he's not forcing Quebec to pay his higher carbon tax rate. Let me break down the numbers for you. Next year, every Canadian will have to pay, outside of Quebec, will have to pay his 14 cents per liter carbon tax. In Quebec, the carbon tax next year has to stay above 5 cents per liter of gas. In 2030, every other Canadian will have to pay 37 cents per liter of gas through his carbon tax. In Quebec, it'll be 23 cents per liter of gasoline. So clearly there's some unfairness here, but the solution should be simple. Scrap the carbon tax, lower gas prices, lower home heating bills.
Well, we certainly noticed that those three things are going to really have a dramatic effect. You've mentioned it. Opposition has mentioned that. We come back from break. Let's talk about a couple. There is a couple other taxes. Believe it or not, there's more taxes we can still talk about. Luxury tax, and then let's just talk about some of the suggestions that the Canadian Taxpayer Federation has to try and balance the budget when we come back from break.